Although Calamity Ware was founded back in 2013, it feels especially apt in the post-2016 window of American life. As we face a series of social calamities, we as a society are invited to recognize that in late-stage Reaganism, the apocalypse largely involves widespread efforts to pretend that everything's okay, that we are invited to keep calm and carry on while the world as we know it comes undone. The Calamity Ware series offers a riff on the blue Willow pattern, which is more than 2 centuries old and has an incredibly rich and complicated history of its own. I already produced 2 videos about Willow ware specifically as preludes to this one. I argued that at this point, Willow pattern tableware signifies as much its own history here within North America as it does the orientalizing fantasy realm of yore. It carries with it an aura of the past, which, depending on one's perception of the past and of blue and white ceramics, might trigger a strong sense of nostalgia or of aversion. This is the first Calamity Ware plate design. Dan Moyer launched a Kickstarter campaign in 2013 to gauge interest in his project, and I think we can fairly assess that it has been an exceptional success. They have an extremely robust website, so I'm not rehashing much of that. It's really fun to spelunk around on there. There are literally over 14 pages worth of blog posts. I encourage you to go visit if you want to know more about his project. I'm just here for the analysis. And no, they are definitely not paying me to make this. I'm starting with this first design not because it's my favorite. It's not. The UFO Invasion is, but I'll come back to that in good time. Rather, I'm starting here because sometimes starting at the beginning is useful, to lay some groundwork. I asked in my first Willow ware video, what elements are necessary to evoke or invoke the classic blue willow pattern? Folks who've been with me since the beginning will remember, but I'll quickly reiterate the key components. Central manor house and willow tree, zigzag fence, footbridge with 3 figures, ship, distant land, birds above. Okay, looking at the Calamity Flying Monkeys plate, and for the sake of this analysis, I'm focusing just on the central panel, because in contrast to the more heavily graphic Willow design, here there are some pretty fine details that merit relatively close analysis. We have both the manor house and the willow tree in roughly the same position. We have a zigzag form, though it's not in the foreground and it doesn't really look like a fence, but more like a folding screen maybe. There is an extremely straight fence over at the other side of the garden. We have a bridge going off to the left, and we have 3 people. They are not all together on the bridge, obviously, but I'll come back to them. Ship out at sea, okay, distant land, and finally, of course, the most obvious difference of all. Instead of lovebirds above, we have a company of pretty angry-looking flying monkeys. And with this element, we're given one of the clearest indications of place that Willow ware has ever offered us. We're not invited into Wonderland or to China. We're looking at Oz, and an Oz that's pretty perilous. I'll say more about this sense of danger when I look at my favorite, the UFO Invasion plate. But for now, I want to quickly highlight a couple of elements that are broadly relevant to the visual logic that governs the world building within the Calamity Ware realm. Moyer has made some seemingly minor compositional changes that are actually pretty significant in the way that Calamity Ware invites the viewer into its space. I mentioned in my laundry list of standard Willow visual components that the zigzag fence, typically in the foreground, is separated in Moyer's design. The reason why this is compositionally significant is because that separation allows the path leading to the manor building to come right up to the edge of the image. The viewer is given a sense that we can walk directly into the space without hindrance. In the original, the fence in the foreground oddly blocks us out. The path is still there, but it's barricaded. In other words, the Calamity Ware scene invites us in, whereas the Willow scene keeps us as viewers from a distance. On the other hand, in the Flying Monkeys, we are immediately faced with a black cat, a well-known portent of ill fortune in contemporary American society. This cat shows up across the Calamity dish set multiverse and is given a key place in their website logo. I would love it if there were a robust and well-researched survey of black cat iconography in the European art tradition. I don't know of one, but I'm showing one of the more famous examples of black cats doing questionable things in European art. It's important to remember that this ascription of bad luck onto black cats is not universal. Across history, there are examples of black cats as lucky or powerful. The beloved Japanese lucky cats, manaki neko, are said to bring good fortune or prosperity when seen in black. the ancient Egyptian goddess of protection, Bast or Bastet. There's the scrappy anarcho cat fighting for labor rights, and Ireland's lucky bog cat. Even within North America, black cat symbolism isn't ubiquitous. For example, in certain Native American traditions, it's owls that are considered taboo, which I never found out about until well after I left Oklahoma. And if I'd known, I'd certainly have reconsidered how to present the Garden of Earthly Delights in classrooms that almost certainly had a handful of Native college students in attendance. But getting back to the cat. Unlike the fence in the classic Willow design, the cat functions not as a physical barrier, but as a psychological warning. It says, "You are welcome to come in, but beware, this is a place of peril." Obviously, we can see that for ourselves, given the flying monkeys. But crucially, the cat is the only individual in this scene who seems to know that we are here. There is a term for this in art history, the figure in the artwork that seems to acknowledge the viewer's presence. This is a connecting role, acting as intermediary between our world and the fictive one beyond the surface of the picture plane. Michael Baxendale called this the Choric figure, and since I'm a specialist of Italian Renaissance art, I adopt his terminology. Choric refers to the Greek chorus, who mediate between the narrative on stage and the audience. Choric figures break the fourth wall, as it were. They offer us an entry point into the world that they inhabit. This used to be my favorite example, illustrating the crossover between our world and the realm of artifice, with little Leonardo Pesaro peering out at us. Notably, there are no Choric figures in the standard Willow pattern, and in Don Moyer's calamitous multiverse, it's never the human figures who recognize us, always the cat, and occasionally some other non-human creature. The humans, on the other hand, are curiously wispy, rendered in a much slighter line than the rest of the scene. This positions them as oddly insubstantial, as though maybe they are already succumbing to the impending calamity. As mentioned earlier, the flying monkey design has 3 people, an unusually high human population for Calamityville. And although they are depicted as far away from each other, they seem to be shouting between them, suggesting a kind of community among the humankind. While insubstantial, we are still given a clear sense of their human emotion, arms thrown up in an obvious state of turmoil. In my last video, I mentioned a handful of 19th century literary responses to blue willow ware, both those that are full of affection and those that were full of contempt. And I jumped all the way forward to a few very recent invocations. In making this jump, I skipped quite a bit of possible literary fodder for analysis from the middle part. That is, pretty much the entire 20th century. And one book in particular seems worth some time. A 1940 children's novel called Blue Willow was so well received that it was awarded a Newbery Honor in 1941, went through multiple reprints, and was translated into at least 7 other languages. It's set during the Great Depression in the rural United States. In the story, the impoverished white protagonist Janie specifically uses her ancestral willow plate as a mechanism for escape. Here I'm showing a series of photos from the U.S. Library of Congress collection. They were commissioned by the federal government during the New Deal, under the Farm Security Administration, or FSA. This kind of work had 2 purposes. It provided much-needed jobs for artists and photographers like Dorothea Lange. The images also highlighted for Americans the plight of their fellow humans across the country, and the need for the social programs that the government was offering. I picked this series of photographs in particular because they align very much with Janie's narrative in Blue Willow. Janie's family, like the one described in Dorothea Lange's long discursive title, left Texas presumably during the Dust Bowl and became migrants, eventually landing in California. I'm harping on these images a little not just because I want to highlight this amazing resource via the Library of Congress, or the degree to which socially funded programs like the FSA provide exceptionally lasting value, although both of these things are true. I'm showing so many because they give a strong sense of the visual field that Janie was depicted as living within, and given the grimness of her landscape, both literally and figuratively, it becomes clearer to today's viewer how much something as banal seeming as a single willow plate might feel exceptional. In the novel Blue Willow, the symbolism of the plate is expressly tied not only to Janie's ability to dream up another reality, but also to the family's past relative affluence. The plate stands as a reminder that at some point an ancestor had the means to acquire this item. When Janie tries to use the plate to show off before her new Mexican-American neighbor Lupe, Its significance is entirely lost on Lupe, who finds Janie's attachment to it puzzling. I think it's pretty relevant that some of the clearest invocations of blue willow ware in contemporary literature are Christian historical romance novels. In a sense, historical romance is absolutely another form of escapism, a means of abandoning the messy present and maybe unpromising future for an imagined past. Unlike the Willow pattern setting per se, which I've argued takes one into a topsy-turvy through the looking glass fantasy realm, historical romance invites an escape into a past that's tied to our own present. It's deeply steeped in a sense of nostalgia. Notably, this Blue Willow Brides series came out between 2011 and 2013, about the same time that Calamity Ware was starting up. In fact, many of the twist on a blue and white contemporary works that I find especially fascinating are from a pretty narrow window between 2005 and 2015. Seems like spinning off Trad Porcelain was having kind of a moment. Also curious here, the cover designs for these books are peculiarly similar. The blue willow plate acts as a kind of halo behind the bust-length image of each protagonist. That said, the role of willow ware is different in these books. Whereas for Janie, it represents a tool of escape and a callback to a time of financial prosperity and familial stability, in the Bride series, it is brought with care from old Europe. The three so-called Blue Willow brides are sisters from the Netherlands, and Maggie Brendan's narrative emphasis is not on the willow pattern, but on the brittle fragility of the dishware and a constant anxiety about keeping it safe. This is an amazing image that I discovered just in making this video by artist Rob Strachty, who works specifically with this set of ideas, and I can't resist giving him a shout out. For both Brendan and Strachty, the chinaware is an heirloom and acts as a kind of relic, connecting them to a maternal line. This is not unlike what I argued the final shot in Reservation Dogs suggests, that Elora Danan is honoring her deceased grandmother Mabel by carefully taking the dish set with her, even as she leaves their shared house for good. Janie's attachment to the personal memories of her ancestral line is less vivid. It's described as shadowy. We're given to understand that although the plate is lightly entangled with maternal associations, Janie's mother passed when Janie was still very small, and her memories are hazy. Rather, the blue willow pattern suggests normalcy and financial security, and to a fantastical place where nothing ever changes. A solid rock in the midst of shifting sands, deep and unchanging. Okay. Now I've spent a very long time talking about this, but that's because it's directly relevant to my analysis of Calamity Ware. If the willow pattern, as we have seen, represents the timeless, something made on an exceptionally durable material of an image that has changed very little over the past several hundred years, it's leaning on this notion of stability that makes Calamity Ware so clever. So to restate, Calamity Ware's compelling quality lies in both upholding and disrupting the sense of stability inherent to willow pattern ceramics. And what makes it so apropos for this moment that we're all living through right now. Calamity Ware imagery conforms to deeply expected iconography. In general, Moyer's designs adhere to the standard scale and overall composition of the classic willow pattern. So one has to look a bit more closely to notice the differences. And now we finally turn back to my favorite one, the UFO Invasion. Again, for quick and close analysis, looking only at the central image, but I will come back to the lip in a minute. We're given all the quick signals that this is a willow riff. Gigantic manor building and bridge leading off to the left, prominent willow tree, garden in the foreground with assorted fencing. So the general composition is all the same, even with the sense of a mainland in the lower right balanced by a distant land in the upper left. Yet here, the airborne element is not flying monkeys or lovebirds, but a trio of UFOs. A second glance reveals that the manor building feels so especially outsized because it's currently being lit up by one of these flying saucers. And further, we are presented with a moment of heightened tension. Is the entire building about to fall to cinders in the next moment? Clearly not, because the cat is just sitting there calmly and the cat is obviously immortal. But the scene's tension remains. So ultimately, one sees that this perfect domestic image, the nostalgia, the fantasy realm, it's being invaded by a foundationally destructive force. To me, this suggests the cognitive dissonance that we as a society are grappling with as we look back to our own history as a nation. The nostalgia, in particular among my fellow white Americans, is revealed as rooted in dystopian inequity. And I want to be clear here. I think this revelation is coming to those in social power, the white, the wealthy, cis, straight, able bodied. I don't think the rot at the core of our institutions has ever been a particular hidden mystery to most Black, African American, Indigenous communities, impoverished folk, and so on. It's not insignificant that the key white lady villain in Jordan Peele's 2017 horror Get Out is drinking tea out of a blue willow patterned cup during the pivotal scene, using the sound of her spoon against the porcelain to bring protagonist Chris Washington under her control. Frozen on ceramic dishes, the slow creep of disordering our social memory allows for a place to come to terms with a paradigm shift in a playful and fundamentally, mostly, unthreatening way. Calamity Ware uses the tools of nostalgia in order to poke holes in the very notion of nostalgia. In some ways, this is similar to the Wars on Kinkade series by artist Jeff Bennett, which also gained quite a bit of press around the same time Calamity Ware was launched in 2013. The Wars on Kinkade disrupt the seeming semiotic transparency, or kitsch per David Porter's definition, of Thomas Kinkade's twee world. Filling a realm of cozy cottages with Imperial stormtroopers and other highly recognizable military technology from the Star Wars universe underscores the instability of Kinkade's fantastical scenes. The especially clever part of Bennett's series is the mutable role of the Imperial forces themselves. At times, they seem to be the menacing force, posing a threat to the idealized settings that Kinkade posits for us. Given our positionality as viewers in the Star Wars franchise, we are invited to see the Imperial forces as the enemy. Because we see the Star Wars narratives primarily through the eyes of the rebellion, the reflexive response is to view them as threatening in Bennett's work as well. But Bennett upends this a little bit in images like this one, where we see a stormtrooper inhabiting a cozy Kinkade cottage while welcoming a friend stormtrooper over for a visit. This role reversal calls into question what might otherwise feel like a straightforwardly menacing picture, like the one on the right. Now we suddenly ask, like the HuffPost columnist, is the Empire preparing for battle or cozying up in a cottage? The fineness of the line between doing good and doing ill has always been at the heart of the Star Wars movies. And I think that ambiguity has really risen to the fore in more recent installments. In analysis of the 2022 Andor series, which, full disclosure, I completely loved, Hannah Arendt's notion of the banality of evil has been, I think, effectively and convincingly evoked. So, in short, are the stormtroopers, aka the Nazis, actually the people outside destroying your house with gleeful abandon, or are they your placid neighbors who are really just doing their jobs and going home every day to their cozy and well-kept houses? Maybe they're having their Nazi friends over for a little visit. And here's where I come back to the Calamity Ware series. It's far more subtle than the Wars on Kinkade series. It takes longer to see a social critique encroaching at the margins of our lives via miniature fantasy world. One might even finish a whole meal without noticing anything amiss. As with Willow Ware, Calamity Ware reveals itself slowly as the food covering it is consumed. It might generate conversation over the course of a meal, or it might not. I mentioned at the beginning that Calamity Ware seems especially apt for this moment, as the world as we know it feels perched on the edge of implosion. And I find it striking that it came into being in 2013 and has only grown in popularity since its founding. As of writing this script, there are 12 discrete Calamity Ware dinner plates, plus untold additional merch, from neckties to letterpress to wallpaper. Calamity Ware's fusion between aesthetic conservatism and thematic upheaval, specifically a quiet upheaval of imagery that felt eternal and static, that is, the Willow pattern. This all speaks very much to our current moment within the United States. In fact, much of the porcelain that I'm interested in engaging was produced around this window of time, about a decade ago now. So, what was happening in 2012 and 2013? Well, The United States had just elected Barack Obama for a second term, much to the consternation of anxious racists everywhere. Yet, at the same time, leftists had long been frustrated with Obama's policies too, and the notion that simply having a charismatic Black president would fix all social ills was looking pretty naive in 2013. In 2010, the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, had been passed without universal health coverage. In 2011, the Occupy Wall Street movement loudly decried the alarming divide between the ultra-wealthy and folks just struggling to pay for daily life. In 2016, the nation voted in a presidential candidate who ran on an openly racist, xenophobic platform, bragged about his own misogyny, and made clear his plans to desecrate federal social programs, everything from public schools to Social Security. The increasingly chaotic atmosphere that characterized the Trump presidency was further exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic, amidst which a sitting president staged an attempted coup. Through all of this mess, we as a society are asking other foundational questions. How do we deal with the growing national understanding of the gap between our stated national principles and our lived daily reality? What if we discard all of our instantiated notions of gender? These are extraordinary proposals that I personally find incredibly exciting and freeing, and they are social paradigm shifts, one more overt in its challenge, one that's desperately trying to catch up with some words written in the 18th century. These are proposals that upset the normative standards of households containing blue and white china sets. Calamity Ware honors the past while at the same time recognizing the change that is afoot by disrupting the stability of the pattern and tranquility of the scene. It's also playful, a little jokey, the eternal placidity of the black cat staring out at us, evidently oblivious to the impending destruction, or maybe just uncaring. The human figures exhibit distress, but also strangely seem not to belong to this world. They are only suggestions of people, mostly stick outlines. The volcano design is unusual for having a more naturalistic figure, and right in the foreground too, but he's hardly sympathetic, waiting impatiently, foolishly, for a ride share as the world burns behind him. Finally, the outside borders around the lip of Calamity Ware contain oblique references to the drama unfolding in the plate's central well. For example, in the giant robot design, each of the 4 cardinal medallions around the rim contains a tiny robot figure in its center. The sea monster border contains abstracted serpentine forms at the intermediary positions and a single unhappy face hidden among the circular ornaments at the top. The UFO design is especially clever, and now we come to why I love it so much. In the central design, Moyer incorporated creatures recalling Space Invaders from the iconic 1978 video game, a nostalgic gesture in itself. One of these alien creatures is hiding in the border near the rim. What we see here is not only do the Space Invaders join the cat in acting as Choric figures, but they are starting to escape their bounded blue and white world. And unlike the robot or sea monster callouts, this little space invader isn't caged within a series of ornamental frames or reduced to an abstraction. It's freely roaming around the plate's lip and almost at the very rim, ready to break into our world. As our eyes are drawn to notice this little escapee, another subtle anomaly in the plate's ornamental exterior pattern emerges. Less obvious, but also maybe hiding in plain sight, a tiny round form next to one of the 5 medallions seems to be emerging from behind the border, as though peeking up over a wall. There's only one, so it breaks the pattern, thus drawing attention to itself. Puzzling on its own, with the look of a periscope or other surveillance device, a search within the central image reveals its doppelganger in the shallow water, inconspicuous among the reeds. So the Space Invaders and the cat aren't the only figures watching us. Unknown beings are also joining their surveillance, looking at us while we eat. For me, the sudden recognition of being watched by unknown eyes leads to a momentary sense of paranoia. How many ways are we being watched? Are these little round ornaments at the ends of the fronds also electronic eyes watching us? What about this bird, so ostentatiously sitting here, frozen, seemingly even less flappable than the cat? Cats are known for their aloof demeanor. Birds are not. Doesn't it care that the world is crashing apart? Or is it even a bird? In the past few years, the satirical birds aren't real conspiracy theory has garnered such a following that the Audubon Society put out a blog post on it. There's even a Snopes page explaining what it is. And the Birds Aren't Real subreddit is still in the top 1% of Reddit communities. All of this traces back to 2017, quite a while after the UFO Calamity Ware plate was first designed. On the one hand, we could say that this is just a coincidence, and the bird in the foreground isn't eyeing us suspiciously. But of course, the idea of a spy bird isn't new. For example, there was a prominent role for a spy bird drone featured in Pixar's 2024 movie, The Incredibles. Bird Alarm allows Syndrome to watch Mr. Incredible's battle with Omnidroid V8 and turns up later to expose Dash and Violet's arrival on Nomanison Island. 5 years later, in 2009, pigeon photography got its own Wikipedia page, which for me has always been a good barometer for public interest in a topic. In 2010, the US Air Force was reported to be developing a spy pigeon drone by 2015. Notice I had to go to the Wayback Machine to find this, as it has otherwise been mostly scrubbed from the internet. Over the next few years, the idea of pigeon spy drones garnered a little interest online as a handful of articles were published, and of course, a bunch of conspiracy theories. So it's at this moment, in 2013 and 14, that Moyer produced the UFO Invasion design, with all of its playful references to surveillance and mechanical encroachment of our domestic space. Could Moyer have known about the birds are fake movement? Of course, I'm not arguing this, rather that the UFO invasion design feels prescient because it tapped into a social anxiety that existed at the moment and has been exploded or exploited in the subsequent years that have trafficked so heavily in conspiracy theories. The UFO plate might have been designed this way, or it might not have been, but the fact is that it speaks to a rising anxiety about surveillance and AI that emerged at the fringe of the internet around 2010 and has only been building since. I opened with this platter, mostly because it fills a horizontal screen space very, very nicely. But coming to the close of this analysis, it seems worth returning to it. Released in 2018, it's one of Moyer's more recent designs, and notably was created after the 2016 election. It differs from earlier Calamity Ware in that it's drifted significantly far from the canonical Willow pattern as to render it nearly unrecognizable as linked to that older design. That is, if one were not already familiar with Moyer's other work in the series. For those looking to find connections, we can see the tells, but they largely hark to other Calamity Ware iconography rather than to the original classic Willow pattern. We have an unhindered path that comes directly to the edge of the platter's central image between bisected fencing, central manor building with placid cat, bridge going off to the left, two actually. There's even a willow tree, though it's harder to parse because the foliage is so dense. The buildings are prolific, but they are nearly overrun with wildlife, vegetation, and dinosaurs. The dinosaurs have replaced the human figures outside of this one solitary person fishing, seemingly oblivious to the dramatic reversal happening in their surroundings. What we're seeing here is an historic flip. Dinosaurs, famously extinct, have replaced humans, at times literally. Our buildings are overcome with encroaching wilderness. The cause for dinosaur extinction is still hotly debated, but there is some consensus that it's tied to rapid environmental climate change. This role reversal, a human-made world populated with dinosaurs rather than with people, imagines us returning to an earlier status quo. As we fail to address the alarming effects of climate disaster, in particular from world leaders openly scorning the very idea in service of their own greed, this image offers a playful reminder that what goes around comes around. And I just have one final comment. As recent essays on so-called dinosaur extinction are quick to point out, dinosaurs did not actually go extinct. They live on in modern-day birds.